Welcome everybody to this session in the Recovery Roadmap conference today, run by UK Tech Cluster Group. My name is Phil Jones. I'm the Managing Director of Wired Sussex. Wired Sussex is a support organisation for digital media and technology businesses, and it's based in Brighton. Wired Sussex was one of the founders of the UK Tech Cluster Group, so we're very proud and pleased to be part of today's conference. This session is on connectivity, broadband and 5G, the new utilities, and there was a strong argument that connectivity was one of the new utilities before we went into lockdown. I think there's very little doubt about it now as a consequence of the experience of lockdown. It's centrally important for the growth of the tech cluster, but we've found that it's centrally important in so many other parts of our life now, including education, healthcare, and enabling businesses to operate in challenging situations. I'm going to introduce the panel to you now, the esteemed panel that we have. We have Shaun Fensom. So Shaun is a Director and Secretary of Manchester Digital, which is a similar organisation to Wired Sussex based in the Northwest. And Shaun helped found it in 2001. He works with a consultancy company, CBN, and advises on digital infrastructure deployment as a tool for economic and social development. And in the early 80s, when Shaun presumably had hair, he co-founded Poptel, one of the UK's first ISPs. We have Ninder Johal. Ninder is the CEO of the Nachural group. And Nachural Records is a British Bhangra record label. He's also a non-executive director at West Midlands 5G and a board member of the Black Country Local Enterprise Partnership. Last but not least, we have Paul Brewer. Paul is Director for Digital and Resources at Adur and Worthing Councils, and he's the strategic lead for climate change, digital design, finance, people, and organisational development. So I don't know how he gets time to have a life outside of that. But Paul is an expert in digital strategy and delivery with some great experience of implementing enterprise scale transformation in digital and ICT. The structure is basically I am going to ask a question of our panelists in turn, and then there'll be a follow-up discussion. If you've got any questions as a viewer, as an attendee, by all means type them and I'll try and get round to them. But we only have half an hour, so if there are any that we can't get round to, I'll make a note of them and maybe we can get back to you later. I'm going to start with Shaun, actually. And Shaun, in terms of if there are people from local authorities or devolved authorities, LEPs and others who are listening now, and want to understand how to accelerate or create better connectivity in the towns and cities that they're responsible for, what are the different ways that they might be able to do?
Thanks, Phil. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Just to say, first thing to say, I think, is that local authorities and public sector agencies, they can make a difference. They have agency themselves. They have needs. In other words, they are in the market buying things at a significant scale, and that's very useful. They have assets. They have things like server rooms, ducting that they might be using for CCTV, roof space, those kinds of things. And they also have opportunities, particularly local authorities, when they are upgrading roads, deploying new cycleways or something like that. They can put in ducting, which is the really expensive part of of building digital infrastructure. So there's a way in which the state, the local state, can really have an impact, quite aside from the idea of a state intervention specifically to correct a market failure, which then has implications for state aid and all the rest of it. Those kinds of ways of doing things don't involve the use of state aid, or you can certainly do them in that way. So the forms of intervention that I would point to roughly follow those three things: needs, assets, and opportunities. One which is very widely used, and Paul is very familiar with, is the notion of anchor tenancy. So arguably this was pioneered by City Fibre, one of the main investors in fibre. And basically the principle here is that the local authority procures in its ordinary way, for its own needs, but in a very long-term way. In other words, it buys forward over several years. It could be as much as 20 years. And that means that the winner of that procurement is then able to build an investment case that they otherwise wouldn't be able to build, because they've got this kind of anchor tenant there. So that's a method which is featured in a number of the local full fibre network projects, which the government has invested in through BDUK in West Sussex, as an example, but also in parts of Greater Manchester, where I'm talking to you from. But that's not the only way that you can use the demand, what it is that the local authorities need, or the public sector needs, in order to create assets. You could build your own infrastructure on the basis by looking at the forward, what it is you would have spent if you'd gone out and bought it in the market in the usual way. And that leads to a method which is commonly called asset reuse, where the local authority and other public sector agencies have assets that can be shared with the private sector in a way which is state aid compatible, or where there is no state aid. One way of doing this is what's called a concession, where you basically invite people to come in and make use of the infrastructure of the assets in return for some kind of a share. The particular way that I'm very familiar with, because I've been very involved in it, is what's called the cooperative neutral host. And that's where you use a cooperative to share access to the state's assets in a non-exclusive, neutral way. So that's used in Tameside, in Greater Manchester, in Blackpool, and will soon be used in mid-Sussex as well, not far from Brighton. And the interesting thing about that is you can then use that with this notion of dig once, that when you're building roads and cycleways and so on, you put in some infrastructure which you can then share using the neutral host method with the private sector. And they're just coming to a finish now. There is a new focus, arguably, on the notion of neutral host with 5G. So I'm sure we're going to be hearing later that 5G needs a lot of fibre. It's not all done with wireless. It needs more fibre than we needed before. And whether the mobile operators are all able to deploy new fibre networks or whether they should share them, I think is a really interesting debate which is going on at the moment. So those are the main methods that I see.
Thanks, Shaun. So a couple of interesting models. I think often local authorities think there's just one model to enable fibre in their towns and cities. But Shaun's pointed out that there's at least two different models, and nicely finished by talking about the importance of connectivity and fibre to 5G. Now, I'm sitting here talking to you today from the Fusebox, which is Wired Sussex's innovation hub in Brighton, and it has a 5G testbed. One of the things that when I talk to people about 5G is often they assume that it's just a faster version of 4G. That's all it is. Ninder, from your experience, can you give us and the people listening a bit more of an overview of what difference 5G makes, and how maybe it's not just about speed and it's not just about a quantitative improvement from 4G.
Yeah, it's so most people when they think of 4G, they look at one of these and they see the number 4G, and then they think, well, the 5G must be just a 5, and it's not that. I mean, this is a real leap from 4G. So there's a couple of things. So it has lower latency. So when you instruct a mobile phone to do something, it'll respond and action whatever you asked it to do much quicker. That allows all kinds of new things to come into play. But it's also 5G allows a greater number of connected devices. So in any one place, you could have a number of devices all connected up, which improves potentially your productivity. It's got a greater capacity for remote execution. So I'll give you an example. An ambulance calls up, someone's just been knocked over, and as they take them into the ambulance, because the data is just more readily available to the consultant, he's able to guide the people in the ambulance, set of procedures, talk to them direct, and by the time they get to the hospital, half the work has already been done. So there's an example. And if those of you watch football, if you went into a stadium and you missed a goal, or you watch cricket, and often I missed a snick behind, with that you could probably see the replay. That just sort of shows the power. But for manufacturing, it could be quite fundamental. Now, we talk about social distancing, 2 meters. Well, imagine that problem going away because you've got robots and artificial intelligence. And then imagine a system where the factory works out when it's running out of components, orders it remotely, orders it automatically. Then they're able to gauge where the product is. It's a bit like Amazon. When somebody sends you a product, you know it's en route. Imagine having 5G allows the product to be actually unloaded and put somewhere, all done through technology. Imagine when a machine breaks down, it's able to predict when it's going to break down. And instead of waiting for a maintenance engineer to come, it's all remotely fixed. I run an events company, and sometimes my printer says, oh, machine's gone down, waiting for an engineer. Well, actually, all that could be done remotely. We're talking about public transport with COVID and people going by car. Well, imagine if you could pre-select your car park space because of technology. You could spend less time driving around looking for a car park space. Therefore, there's going to be less congestion. So these are just some of the things that you could do. And again, within a manufacturing place, so this preventative, and as a product makes its way along the assembly line, the technology is such that you can work out before a problem happens how to rectify it. And somebody was saying to me from the NHS, fantastic insight, and they do the technology at the moment. You know, when they do a swab and they check whether you've got it or not, well, it's a very uncomfortable experience. But there's a company that's preparing a pill, and within the pill, there's going to be a number of cameras who could do the work for you. So imagine swallowing a pill, and within your inside, the cameras are taking all the shots and could probably give you a real-time analysis without you having gone through that pain. And the cameras within a pill, could you imagine a pill, could do all of that. And from a public sector perspective, if you're thinking about how your car park works, think about now how people park. If you think about how you communicate with your constituents, you could use 5G to communicate with them that much better. They can see where their benefits are, and they can see how the place is being put together. You can imagine also if you were a patient, and somebody in the NHS told me they tried to convince all their consultants to do interviews with their patients via mobile phone. And they said, no, we just won't do it. It can't work because we need to see the people. Guess what? They're all doing it by video now, because the COVID situation meant people were very reluctant to come in. So what you're now finding through this, and of course, look what we're doing. We're working from home. We're calling in from home. So the place, so if you're a council, think about the place, think about your high street, think about the offices, which may no longer be occupied by people, because this technology allows them now to work from home. So how will business rates change? How will those buildings be used in the future? What does the high street look like? And what does congestion look like if the card is replaced by vans dropping products off all over the place because people are more prone to now ordering online? These are just some of the things that are going to accelerate. I'll finish with one anecdote. We talked about the music industry. So I was a bit like an ostrich in the sand. So 2007, this iPhone came along, and you know something? So what? It's an iPhone. But actually, the consumer said, we want to download through an iPhone. We don't want to go to a shop on the high street between 9 and 5 o'clock. We don't want to then go back home, find a power source with which to plug the CD player in and play the CD. We were ostriches in the sands. We didn't understand what technology was doing to us. And with 5G, there are going to be businesses you and I can't even think about today that are going to emerge tomorrow because of that. And councils, public authorities need to think that businesses will change, the way they operate will change, the type of people they employ will change, and the type of curriculum we're going to have for the future that we can't see will also change. This will happen through technology and through things like 5G, where the acceleration is going to be much quicker than we've ever seen before.
Yeah, I think that's right, Ninder. And, you know, it's certainly the case that the experience of COVID and the lockdown has accelerated cultural changes that otherwise may have taken years. So the shift to remote working, for instance. And the interesting thing I think about, as you said, the interesting thing about 5G is it is very fast, but it's not just about speed. It's also about latency and stability. And that latency thing is, you know, I think people don't think it's important when they think about their mobile phone, because you don't really notice, by and large, the latency as a consumer. But if you're using 5G, as you say, to undertake remote surgery, then actually milliseconds is the difference between life and death. If you're using 5G in autonomous vehicles or semi-autonomous vehicles, then those sensors being able to read very fast is a matter of absolute safety. So you can imagine that the aggregation of speed, stability, and latency will create real kind of opportunities going forward. And
I think what technology allows us to do, you're absolutely right. Technology democratizes the way our society works, because now suddenly we don't rely on institutions. We can do things through technology. And I think where government needs to, and local government needs to understand, is that that's the way forward. And technology could assist in the government's overall macro picture of levelling up, because actually technology isn't regional based, technology is global. And this is an example of how you can use technology to level up and bring people up through technology so they can compete and have the same access to the same opportunities everybody else does.
Yeah. And I want to come to Paul now, because Worthing and Adur, in comparison to some of the local authorities or councils that are involved today, is fairly small, but it's actually has got an incredible reputation for the way that it's thought about digital and the way that it's using or planning to use connectivity, digital infrastructure in order to rethink the way, as a local authority, it delivers its services or its relationship with its citizens. So I'm just going to ask Paul to talk about that now.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, so at Adur and Worthing, we're on the coast next to Brighton, and the population's 170,000. We have Worthing and Shoreham as the main sort of urban centres, with smaller sort of urban centres strung along the coast. About 4 or 5 years ago, we set the ambition to get full fibre infrastructure into our area, and the ambition was very much about the local economy and getting fibre to homes and businesses. And as Shaun's described, we chose the anchor tenancy route to achieve that. And we working with West Sussex County Council as partners, we procured full fibre, dark fibre connectivity to our sites, which in phase one was just a handful for us, nine or so sites. But because we went early, we were the first to be funded by the local full fibre fund, because we sort of already had our project up and running and sort of declared our hand, as it were. And as a result, City Fibre were procured onto a framework which is accessible by all the districts and boroughs in West Sussex. And they announced last year a £25 million investment in fibre to the home and to the business. And they're currently building out. There's a fibre exchange which has been established, which will run the network, and they've passed 3,500 homes now, with a target of 60,000 over the next couple of 3 years. So
I mean, maybe if you can just explain what difference you think this connectivity is going to make to you as a council, as a local authority.
So we've actually now procured 83 additional sites. So we've got roughly 90 fibre locations going in. And what we did was to conduct a mobile coverage survey. We used consultants to put mobile coverage equipment on a refuse lorry, which drove around every street and told us where the coverage not spots were. So we have a map which is very confidential of the 4 MNOs and where their not spots are. So we've actually, because we had the opportunity to connect 90 council sites to the network, we did that not spot analysis, and we've put fibre right where the not spots are and made sure about that, so that we can then have a conversation with MNOs about plugging those gaps. So we have this estate which is on a 30-year right to use. So we have a long-term access to fibre for those 90. And our intention, and it was just sort of publicised today, actually, that we're going to invest in citizen Wi-Fi. So our aim now is to use those 90 fibre locations to deploy citizen Wi-Fi very, very widely. So that'll be in each of our town centres, all of our secondary shopping areas, our key open spaces, and all of our community centres, as well as sheltered housing, all of our CCTV sites. So we've got this fibre infrastructure that the local authority controls, that dark fibre infrastructure for that 30-year period, and we're going to deploy citizen Wi-Fi. And we're just doing some design work with Arup Digital Studio to really understand what the user experiences need to be for citizen Wi-Fi to be the best it can be, including working hard on digital inclusion in relation to how we might make citizen Wi-Fi accessible to those that are currently excluded, thinking about how community centres can be redesigned for the digital age with that ultra-fast fibre to them. And what I think is really important is for local authorities to take the role that Shaun described, and then to think about how to keep innovating on top of what it does. So we feel like we've done the dark fibre, so that the fibre is going out to every home and business on commercial terms, and we know that the costs to them will be good, and there'll be competition to drive those prices down. So we feel like that's in place. And then our role now is to deploy citizen Wi-Fi, to think about free digital infrastructure and free connectivity to drive outcomes like the renewal of the town centre, innovative uses of open spaces, to the 5G point about how 5G can be deployed for creative and the arts, for example, how we can think about wayfinding in our places, promotion of local shopping, promotion of health and well-being, for example. So to use citizen Wi-Fi as a platform to create a connective layer in our area. And we're taking a design approach to make sure that we speak to all the stakeholders like freelancers, local retailers, people interested in tourism and the creative sector, to make sure that citizen Wi-Fi is is giving them the benefits that are needed to encourage people towards certain activities in our area. So if you like, it's the local authority trying to act to intentionally design and provide civic digital infrastructure, and then we think we'll provide a platform for further innovations, and we're going to be deploying an IoT network as well alongside this, and we've mapped out our IoT network and exactly where we're going to deploy the equipment to deliver that, and that will create another innovation platform as well. So it's very much about platforms for me, thinking about and putting in new platforms, and then encouraging innovation with those provided services. So we're fully funded, and we're just doing the procurement for lighting up our estate, and then delivering a Wi-Fi managed service over the top of it, which will be free to use for everybody.
So it's really interesting, and unfortunately we haven't got time now, but one of the things that would be interesting to follow with what you're doing, Paul, is whether the experience of COVID will change your priorities, whether residential and people working from home will become more important than workspaces, whether the fact that retail may not come back in the same way that it was before may influence your digital strategy as well. I just want to finish now, because we've only got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to ask each speaker in turn, starting with Shaun. If there was one ask that you could make of central government, if they are one of the 50 or so people listening to this conversation, what would that ask be? And then I'm going to ask the same question of Ninder and you, Paul.
Okay, well, what I would say is
Sure.
recognise the opportunity that public sector agencies, including local authorities, have to actually make a real difference. Recognise that, you know, in meeting their own needs and building their own stuff, they can share that stuff with the private sector, and we can then all work together, so that instead of people overbuilding each other's networks, we collaborate in order to deploy this full fibre infrastructure as quickly as possible. That's the one thing, you know, the government needs to lead on that notion, in my opinion.
Cool. Ninder?
I think the burning question for those interested in 5G technology and mobiles is the Chinese Hawaii problem. And I think we need to come to a conclusion with that quickly, because you hear mumblings of people stopping doing things they would be doing because of the uncertainty around the whole Huawei exercise. And I think that is so ingrained and such a part of the 5G digital strategy. The quicker we can resolve that, the quicker we can work on everything that Shaun has said and Paul has said, because that really is that corridor of uncertainty we need to sort.
Cool. Paul?
Yeah, I would say please make sure that local government financing is sorted out in the best way possible, because we need this space to innovate for our local areas. Related to that, I think, is the reform of business rates, and the shift to a 2% sales tax will start to protect physical retail alongside online. I think everyone should be taxed in the same way. Otherwise, the high street will definitely die.
Brilliant. Okay, I'd like to thank, it's been a great session, and I'd like to thank our three speakers, Shaun, Fensom, Ninder, Johal and Paul Brewer. Just to remind you that there's 3 more sessions starting in the next 30 seconds. I'm going to be jumping into the one on space, which actually isn't about flying to Mars. It's about workspaces in a post-COVID environment. And I'd be very interested in that because I'm director of a co-working space in Brighton called The Skiff. So usually at this time, I'd ask the audience to applaud and give some thanks to our speakers. If you want to do that, that will be great in your own homes. But I'd personally like to thank all 3 of them for a really fascinating and useful session. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.